Vintage watches on eBay, that can be a minefield, but with a bit of luck you can find there gems at a low price. And this gentleman here recently had big luck. Welcome to Caseback Watches, my name is Tim, and in this video the Vulcain Meteor II is our topic. I had this eBay search where you get notifications when something interesting pops up with the name Vulcain, because the Vulcain brand is back, we all know this, with very special, beautiful watches, relatively pricey. They want to establish the company, I think, above the 3K mark, and so I thought, wait a second. Back then it was rather mid-tier, and I bet there are some nice pieces left, like the Cricket. And so I had this eBay search, and then the big problem with eBay, of course, you have a lot of criminals and a lot of listings that are not legit, and you have so many of them. So sometimes you have to go through hundreds of watches to find something good. But as said, this time I had big luck, and so on page one I saw something very interesting, and I thought, what's this? I knew it was something special. With a bit of experience with vintage watches, you see something special, or you know something special when you see it. And then I thought, Meteor II, I've never heard of that line, Meteor II. And I googled around, and then I realized this is somewhat a forgotten line. I mean, obviously a line with two parts, 1 and 2. This is the 2, so this indicates that there are a lot of watches out there with that name. But again, I've never came across that line. And so I googled a bit around, and I found out that this reference and this model is extremely rare nowadays. And I figured Vulcain back then was rather mid-tier. And we have the phenomenon that mid-tier watches are not in good shape, or they haven't survived at all, because people back then thought, it's not super precious. When it breaks, I can't give it away, or I can't throw it away, actually. And so I think this is the explanation that many vintage watches from the mid-tier haven't survived. They're 100% forgotten sometimes. And so I thought, all right, you have to grab this watch. And I showed it to Cormac Hanley, 470, just for a second opinion, and he immediately said the same thing. Buy that watch, buy it. And then it was an auction, so a bit tricky. The reputation of the seller was okay, and so I thought, all right, I will just throw enough money in that direction to grab the watch with a bit of certainty, and I did, and it arrived. And of course it was thrilling to find out the real condition, because on the images of the seller the thing looked, for starters, chrome-plated. And of course this indicates a low value, but then I thought, wait a second, these deep indentations in chromium, this is not really realistic. And in fact it is steel. It is a steel watch with some indentations, but with razor-sharp edges, so as a signal that this watch never was polished. And of course, for a collector, this is really nice. If you want to polish it, then you can do it yourself, but then it's your decision. You don't have to buy that decision from another guy. And so unpolished vintage watches, this is really the stuff for me here. And an interesting question was, of course, how old it is. And I went through my memory for vintage watches, and my estimation was late 50s and early 60s. And I think that's valid if you see the components, if you see the amount of patina, which is very little. So this indicates that the watch is in good shape, that the seals are in good shape. So you could see everything, not really damaged, but also not perfect. And of course the state of the loom also indicated that this was produced in the late 50s, early 60s. I'm not 100% sure, but that's my guess here. And then I went to the watchmaker to check the movement, because you cannot find on the internet what kind of movement they used back then. And the watchmaker worked on it very hard to open, and then we found something very pleasant inside, and that I'm going to show you in the light box right now. And let's begin here with the basic specifications, with the measurements. We have here a watch with a case diameter of 35 millimeters. The length lug to lug here is 42.5, and the height is only 9.5 millimeters. So we have a very slender and elegant watch. Then of course we have a plexi crystal, because as said, we're talking here about a watch from the late 50s to early 60s, and the only reasonable material there was this plexiglass. You may note that the plexi here is a little loop on the date, very interesting feature. And I will not tell you anything about the water tightness because these vintage watches are not waterproof at all. At least I wouldn't risk it. And inside this watch ticks now the ETA 2425. So an automatic, very robust movement, very slow ticking, typical for this time with 18,000 beats per hour. And it offers a pretty modern power reserve of 42 hours. And here you have the case back, and you see the lug width of 19 millimeters, which certainly is a downside, but we cannot do anything against it. So screw down case back with the Vulcain engraving here, very nice. Some information, the reference number, here's the R3629A. And also very interesting is the crown, marked crown with this, I don't know how to call it, this form, but it fits the watch. And now you see what I've meant when I said that this watch was never polished. You see, of course, deep indentations and scratches, but you see them on plain surfaces, and you see especially the edges of these facets here are super, super sharp. So this watch never was in contact with a polisher, and this is, of course, very, very, very nice. And now let's go a bit into detail when we have the dial here. Let's study the dial a bit. You have indices pure and simple. You have the date on position 3, a sector dial, so this cross here, Meteor II, automatic, and a bit of a Swiss made. And you have a brushing in this center plate of the dial. Just wonderful sunburst effect, and this, of course, gives a lot of character and a lot of style to the watch here. And another interesting observation is that I think we see here radium. The amount of lume is very small there on the hands, and you see these tiny, tiny dots there. Of course, it's not active anymore, but it has this brownish color that radium can have. And this would indicate the mentioned time period, so late 50s, early 60s, because at the end of the 60s they used tritium instead of radium, because radium obviously is very dangerous to handle. In this case, I'm not really concerned because the amount is very, very, very small. But if you have your big pilot watch with a lot of radium, I wouldn't put that beside your bed, to be honest. And what I find here really amazing is the how to describe it, are the vibes from the typo to the design. The Vulcain logo, for example, looks great. It's an old thing, but it looks really great. It doesn't look outdated in any form. And the Meteor II, the font is just great, just nice. And also the font here for the date wheel, these elements are just so well done, so well done. It's so clear. I think this clearness was the first reason that made me stop on eBay when I saw this watch. But now let's operate it. This 2425, here you see an image, by the way, I took at the watchmaker's shop. This movement isn't automatic as mentioned, but provides hand winding. Very heavy to do, by the way, because the crown is a bit slippery and small now, and the watch is wound, and so I will not force it. And then you have one position. There you go, nice clock, and there, with that position, you do everything. And this is a nice aspect here, because when you have a damage on a vintage watch, often it's the quick set for the date, and it can be a pain to find replacement parts for that, of course. And so I was very happy when I discovered that this is the other method of a quick set. You go to midnight, and there the date is changing, relatively precise, actually with an excellent precision. And so with this watch, you just go back some hours, and then you cycle again through midnight, and then you can do it as often as you want. And so it's very comfortable, and it's a very robust system. It's very hard to break this system, and so you find a lot of vintage watches with this system in perfect order, at least fully operational. And now let's close it again and let's pop it on the wrist. But first, what's this? What's this? What kind of animal is this? We could say, well, it's something crocodilish. But actually this is ostrich leg, believe it or not. This is a new old stock Kaufmann strap made in Germany, 19 millimeters, and there was a little seal on it, ostrich leg. So I've never seen this before, but I must give the ostrich, but that he makes a great combination together with this watch. And there you go, 17 centimeter wrist, 35 millimeter watch. And you see very, very, very nice impression, not too dominant, not too subtle. It's just perfect in my humble opinion here. And here in combination with the blue dress shirt Old frayed shirt, old frayed watch, and again, good combination. Very happy with it, and I think there are no alterations in need here when you see this. Just nice. Okay, that was the Vulcain Meteor II, and now I have a pleasant announcement. We have a winner for the last giveaway. Veneziani goes to Sweden, or went to Sweden. It arrived, and new owner is Valle, and he sent me this amazing wrist shot with the watch, and he's very happy about it, and I'm very pleased that this watch found a owner who really values it. And the last part of this video is a watch sent in by a viewer, an image sent in by Martin from the US to caseback.watches@icloud.com. There you can submit images if you want to share here something interesting and beautiful. And Martin has sent me that little Rolex here. And he writes, here we have the gateway drug into Rolex watches. The Oyster Perpetual date reference 1500 is the least expensive way to an automatic Rolex with chronometer movement. I own this 34mm watch, which was made in 1971 for 4 years, and it works exceptionally well. Even with my 7.25-inch wrist, I think it's doable to wear a watch of this size. This Rolex reference features the rug caliber 1570 movement, which the company used from 1965 to 1974 in various watch models. The only real negative is the non-quickset date, which is very annoying if you are not a one-watch person, and I don't like watch winders. In the background you see the Schoolhouse Beach in the northern California coast between Bodega Bay and Jenner. In summer this is a great site to escape from the heat, as the temperature was only 58 Fahrenheit when I took this photo, while it was 95 Fahrenheit 20 miles further inland where I live. Yeah, that's a very interesting watch, and this is one of the models that brought me personally into the watch game, because I had a co-worker years ago, and he was a sailor years before he entered the newspaper industry. And after one long trip, he had a bit of money, and then he bought exactly that model. And I was curious about the look, only the look. I didn't know anything about watches at that time. And I asked him what it is, and he said, that's my Rolex. And then I thought, what? This guy owns a Rolex, and I own a crappy iPhone. And so this brought me to do a bit of research, and I still love the look of that watch. And the question, is 34 too small for a wrist? I think in that case is no, it's not. It's a classic. It's supposed to look like that. And so if you dig the look and the style and the genre, I think you shouldn't worry a second about this rather small diameter. So Martin, thank you very much for sending in this amazing watch, this amazing image. And dear viewer, again, if you want to participate here, then you can send images to caseback.watches@icloud.com. Horizontal format looks best on screen. And that's all for this episode. If you want to have little updates in between these videos, then you can join me on Instagram. It's caseback_Tim. And now let me thank you very much for your attention, and until next Friday.